here. So I just want to welcome everybody. It's so nice to see you guys. My name is Laura Wills and I'm the Associate Director of Alumni Relations. And thanks for joining us for today's Dickinson Coffee Club. It's a series of casual conversations with retired faculty and administrators that we've been doing, and they've just been such I want to mention that I'll be recording this webinar because there's a few folks that can't join us today and they'd like to watch it later. So Noel asks that I was going to do an introduction, but everybody knows Noel, so I'm not even going to do that. I mean, he was at the college from '69 to 2005, but you all know what, what he does and who he is. So Noel, I'm going to start asking Noel just 3 questions just to get us kicked off, and you can hear his answers, and then I'll open up to all of you. But he wants to hear from you. So he asked if we could just very quickly go around and say where you are currently, although we've done that for most of you so far, and maybe one of your favorite memories, because as me at the beginning, we have a wide range of people who have signed up for this seminar. Not everybody's on yet. Hopefully we'll get a couple more. But just tell us where you are and maybe a favorite memory of yours. So that we're not all talking together. I'm just going to go in order on my screen. So Michael, do you want to go ahead and just say your year and a favorite memory?
Michael Hosick, 1970. And my favorite memory, sorry, Noel, was probably our trip to Iceland in 1968.
Wow. Wonderful. Eric.
Eric Bloom, class of 84. And my favorite memory is introductory geology with Noel, and having my dad, who was a geologist at Cornell, introduce me to my first professor at Dickinson.
Oh my gosh, great. Dave Robinson.
I'm Dave Robinson. I'm currently a distinguished professor in the Department of Geography at Rutgers University. And for the last 30 years, I've been New Jersey's state climatologist. My memories are working after Noel's trip to the Antarctic, my junior year. I'm class of 77. My senior year, I lived Antarctica with Noel as I did a senior honors project on Antarctic sea ice.
Wow, how about that? Mary.
I'm Mary Somerville. I'm a class of 73. I am not involved in geology or earth sciences in any way. I live in Washington State, where it is quite early for me to be up this morning. I'm an administrator at a local synagogue, and I'm a musician, using by double majors in music and religion from Dickinson. And I wanted to come today because Noel's class was one of my favorites that I took at Dickinson. I can't say of a special moment. I do remember the road trip to see the Juniata Sandstone meeting the other scene, which I cannot remember now. But the whole class was just so wonderful, and it got me interested in looking at the world, at the physical world more sharply, and it has stayed with me my whole life. I still notice geological stuff to this day, even though I don't use it.
That's wonderful.
So,
Washington is a nice place to see lots of geology too.
yeah, it's a wonderful area. It's got everything. Rock climbing, mountain climbing, sailing, bicycling, swimming. I mean, it's just a great university too. Here, I live in Bellingham. It's got Western Washington University as it.
Nice. Bruce.
Right. Well, I was also with Dave in the class of 77, and I had Noel. And one of my most fond memories was when Noel did the 101 with Hank, and we were over in ATS, and I think it was Noel popped out of a trunk. And is that true, Dave? I was so taken by the whole thing. I don't remember who did what.
Oh my goodness. George, can you top that one?
Well, I'll give you an honest answer. And I'm currently in the Adirondacks, where I have a home and lived most of the year now. And I graduated from Dickinson in 71, thanks to another gentleman on the phone by the name of Michael Hosick, who agreed to be my roommate, and he tempered me down enough so that I studied and I got through school. And my favorite memory of Noel was that I was one of the first people to meet him, introduced to Noel by PH, and Alex Rue and I gave Noel a tour. We were asked to take him around and show him Carlisle and things. So
Oh my gosh.
from that point on, we've been fast friends and great colleagues, and Noel's a great reason why Dickinson is such a great school to go to.
Oh, how nice. And John, good morning.
Yes, I finally got on.
You did. I can see you now.
Yeah, I'm living in Carlisle, have all my life, and I was a technician in the Department of Physics and Astronomy for 40 years. And maybe some of you will remember me. I remember a few of you guys because I used to hang out over at the Coffee Club at Dickinson's Department of Geology and Chemistry. And I remember Noel. My favorite memory of Noel is all the great pictures that they showed us that he took of maple sugar making up in New England.
Nice. Oh, very fun. Well, Noel, this must just be a joy for you to do today. So I'll go ahead. I'm just going to ask a few questions, just some generic questions, and then I'll open it up to you guys. So Noel, I mentioned you were at Dickinson from 69 to 05. And I know when we were on campus, you were on campus, even after you retired, you were on campus pretty much every day, I believe. I saw you all the time. So tell us about how the college changed during your time there.
Well, she warned me ahead of time about these questions, so I made a few notes, but the older of you will remember the days when you would say you were going to Dickinson and people would say, "Oh, Fairleigh Dickinson?" And there were more than a few of those. Speaking of New Jersey, I looked it up and it's still there, but I don't know much about it. Other things I thought about that go back to the early days too are, I remember when I came, most men were worried about the draft. And there was an assistant chaplain who I think spent most of his time counseling about the draft. What am I going to do? One that you might not think about is when I came, we used to have quite a few people who were not geology majors who would hang out with the majors. They were friends. I guess that's what we called them, but they hung out with the majors and they liked to go on weekend field trips with the majors. It was a way to get away from the campus and go out. And I realized many years later that over the years, Dickinson came up with more things for students to do on the weekend. There weren't a lot in those days. And so this was a way for the students to become engaged and to go. It had its negative effect on geology because we would find it harder and harder to get the non-hardcore people to go on field trips. There was a time, many of you will remember, when we would in the spring take the whole intro geology class in buses and go to Perry County and look for fossils and all the other neat things that we like to do. And it became harder and harder to require everybody to go on those field trips on a Saturday. My Saturday is tied up. I do remember one time that they had to tell us an excuse if they couldn't go. And one time somebody came and said, "Well, I've been invited with my family to have lunch at the White House. And how can you argue with that?
Perry County, White House.
Yeah. Well, and then there are the obvious changes for everybody. Think about the days when we didn't have computers and the internet. I mean, I can remember when I was a freshman, it was unusual to phone my parents in Vermont. That was when I would go back to the college from Vermont from vacation. We had a code set up that I would telephone and say that I wanted to reverse the charges. And my folks would refuse to reverse the charges, except, but they knew that I had arrived back safely at Dickinson. Well, anyway.
Yes, indeed. So what have you been up to since retirement?
Oh, a little bit of everything. I'm not sure all of you know, many of you know that I didn't get married for quite a while. I married when I was 49. I married another geologist. She still works for the Pennsylvania Geological Survey. And at 54, we had a son. And wonder of wonders, this son ended up being a geology major, for God's sake. It's really kind of a neat experience to have conversations with him. But at any rate, he went to Bates as an undergraduate and then was accepted at the University of Maine. Wonder of wonders, one of his advisors was the guy I went to Antarctica with. And he did a master's thesis project on the dating of glacial moraines in New Zealand. Well, he's going to New Zealand. Mom and Dad wanted to go, even though I'd been there many times on the way to Antarctica. But New Zealand is a place that you can never go wrong. And it was nice to go and do New Zealand rather than have to move on. And so the three of us went and spent 2 weeks in New Zealand before he started his project. I do have to tell you that young Noel hit a stumbling block when it came time to write up his thesis, and he stopped out, and he is right about now going back to writing it. And I think it'll get done eventually. But meanwhile, he became a ski bum in Utah, working at Park City. What else? Our Geological Society of America has sections. There's a Northeast section that I have gone to their meetings. There's a spring meeting every year, except darn it, this last year with the virus, it's just a mess. But since my retirement, I worked on and was one of the major organizers of 3 of those meetings with up to 1,600 people in one case. And I learned lots of things about dealing with hotels. I learned, for example, that in order for them to furnish us the rooms, they're going to charge a lot for certain things. Like the first one I worked on, second one in Baltimore, they were going to charge us $80 a gallon for coffee. And yeah, I see some scowls. And I asked Dickinson at the time what they would charge for catering for a gallon of coffee, and it was $11.50. And so I did have some conversation. I learned be polite and have some conversations with these people and tell them that geologists are not on an expense account quite like executives. And they did reduce the price. If you work with them, they turned out to be fairly helpful. Soon after I retired, one of my colleagues said, why don't you do a guide to good geology teaching outcrops in the Carlisle area? How to get there, what's there, references about it. And I took it to heart and I worked on it for over 10 years. And by the time I was done, I had over 60 localities. And all of you will remember some of them like Wagoner's Gap, Hammond's Rocks, that sort of thing, but lots of others. And I eventually turned it over to the department a year or so ago. They seemed happy with it. They printed me one copy that I could have as a printed copy, and they printed one for the department, but it's largely meant to be used online. You don't print lots of things nowadays. They cost money to print too. I just was reminded of something else, and that is, you probably remember my office was full with books. I had lots of books. And when I retired, I had to move out for somebody else. And so I had to store the books. And I rented a storage facility, one of these garage-like things. And there were over 50 paper boxes, you know, the standard ones that a bunch of paper, reams of paper comes in. And there were over 50 of them of books. And then a year or so ago, I decided, well, I better get rid of these. I wouldn't leave them for somebody else someday. And so I talked to a couple of people who deal in old geology books. Well, nobody wanted them. If I could come up with a 1840 edition of Charles Lyell, they were interested, but not textbooks and that kind of thing. And so what to do? And I finally said, well, I'm not going to sell them. And the department agreed that I could have a table in the middle of the department. And I brought a couple of boxes in each week and put them out. And eventually about 2/3 of them went. Students, fellow faculty. It was an interesting thing though. At some point I was talking to one of my colleagues, Marcus Key, and Marcus said, well, look at our younger colleagues. These were the young ladies that had come in the last 2 or 3 years. Look in their offices at the bookshelves. And I did surreptitiously, just stopped to see them. And they had 2 or 3 bookshelves or 4, and there were about 1.5 shelves of books. They do everything online nowadays. One doesn't. It changed the world, this computer stuff. It changed what we're able to do right now, actually, in some good ways. Some of you know, some know better than others, that there is a Potter lecture. Thanks to George starting it, there is a Potter lecture now for some, 13 or 14 years. And the last one fell victim to the coronavirus. They were about to have it when the coronavirus started. A nice lady from doing limnology from Northwestern University. And she was to come. I get to meet the person. We go out to dinner, all that stuff. All that fell apart. And then the department invited her to do exactly what we're doing now. With Zoom for some of us, and then the rest of us, it was streamed online. Very nice talk. But the thing I learned that I had not thought about before is when we did these before, everybody gathered in a lecture room, and at most, somebody might have come from Johnstown to the lecture. Most were friends in Carlisle, people at the Pennsylvania Geological Survey, that sort of thing. Maybe somebody from Gettysburg or F&M, but that was it. All of a sudden this year it was online, and through hearing names and seeing questions from certain places, I knew that somebody in Denver, Colorado, I think it was Bruce probably, somebody in Denver, Colorado, somebody else in Washington, D.C. was able to come to this lecture. And certainly I would like it if we went back to lecture in a lecture hall and meet the person, but I think we should do it online too. And that's a benefit, even though I have thought many times about how unhappy I would be trying to teach by remote. Well, I could tell you more things, but go ahead, Laura.
Well, you have, you were at Dickinson for such a long time. I'm sure you have a gazillion memories, but do you have a funny one or an impactful one you'd like to share with the group?
Well, who was it? Bruce that mentioned the box,
Yeah.
the chest.
Mm-hmm.
It was actually a big wooden box and it was in Dana Hall, I believe, Dana lecture room. And Henry Hansen was going to do a lecture about the famous Miller-Urey experiment, in which Urey's student Miller was going to create the beginnings of life from plain old chemistry to demonstrate that it could happen. And so Henry set this up and did the lecture, and I was curled up in the box with various things. And I know I occasionally made noise. The box was set up so that the hinge was on the lecture desk, and the hinge was toward the class. And I had a straight old polyethylene squirt bottle that you squeeze to wash things. And I put the nozzle out through the crack, and every so often I would squeeze, and somebody in the front row would get sprinkled. And eventually, I had a CO2 fire extinguisher, and I fired that a couple of times with a cloud going out to the side. And Henry, doing something about creating life, and presumably I was the life that was getting created. And finally, I rose up and my fingers came over the edge of the hinge lid, and Kilroy was here sort of version, and it brought the house down. One learns as a teacher early on that if you're going to do these crazy things, you don't do them at the early or middle part of the class. You let the class do its lesson, and then this comes near the end, because if you do it early, they're distracted. They won't pay attention to the rest of what you're doing. And so I did another one that maybe or maybe not everybody there. Anybody remember the time I shot a duck in ATS? No. Well, once I was doing a lecture in ATS, one section, large class, and there were squeaks of some sort up above us. And it's clear that the air handling systems up there were squeaking, little pulleys or something. And I said, that's funny. And eventually it gave me an idea, and eventually I got somebody to take a duck call that I have, just a wooden whack, whack, whack duck call, and go up in the catwalks that were up above, could walk around up above everybody and quack like a duck. And meanwhile, I borrowed a starter's pistol from the athletic department. And you can imagine if I showed up in a class with a pistol nowadays, what would happen to all kinds of legal and other things. But this duck, and I said, I'll get that son of a gun. And I held up the pistol and blam. And I said, I missed. But I said, maybe it'll be back. And so the next class I came and I set the pistol up on the lectern, and I said, if that duck comes, and near the end, I had arranged for, some of you might remember Tim Conkus. Anybody? Tim Conkus went up, and we had got some feathers from somebody in the biology department that had a dead pigeon in the freezer. And near the end, there was the quack again, and I went blam. And the feathers came fluttering down from the above. And I said, I got him. And anybody who was in that class will remember. But favorite memory, one other one, as I said earlier, I used to go to the Northeast Geological Society of America meetings, and there was one up in northern New Hampshire at the marvelous Mount Washington Hotel. It's a huge, beautiful place with a view of Mount Washington. And this was March. You could look out the big plate glass windows, and there was Mount Washington with white on it, and you could see the observatory up there where they have very mild weather. And it happened to be I believe the 150th anniversary of the Geological Society of America. And they wanted to do something to celebrate it. And it turns out that one of the founders was a famous geologist in New Hampshire named Charles Hitchcock, whose father was also a geologist. And so I was asked if I would appear as Charles Hitchcock and make some remarks. And so I said, okay. And they had agreed that they would not tell people. This would be a surprise. And I discovered that Hitchcock had a mustache. Hitchcock incidentally was a professor at Dartmouth. And he did not go up. He arranged for the first winter over on top of Mount Washington. And you can imagine staying up there in the winter before they had the modern facility they have now was something else. But at any rate, I was asked if I would be the person. They arranged for me to go to the Dartmouth theater people and borrow a frock coat and get me all dressed up. And I decided I ought to have a mustache. And most of you know that I have had a beard since the Pleistocene, actually since 1975. And so the thought of getting away with a beard, getting rid of a beard was daunting, but I said, okay. So I let my beard go fairly long. And then the first 2 days of the meeting, I was there in my usual attire. And then before the banquet, I was invited to go to someone's room, and we had brought the appropriate equipment. And I was turned from this into that
Mm-hmm.
with a mustache and all dressed up. And I appeared, I had been behind a screen, and everybody was seated for dinner. And the person introduced me, introduced Charles Hitchcock. I appeared, went up on the stage, and there were all these whispers, who's that? Who's that? Who's that? And I was told later by somebody who was another former student, not here this day, Craig Deach, said, the minute you opened your mouth, I knew who it was. Okay, I've probably told enough stories. What now?
Oh, no, you could just go on and on. This is just so
No,
much.
no,
Before we
So,
start, I did want to
I'd
say
love
that
to
Mary-
hear from some of you folks.
Yeah. Before we start, Mary did write in at the beginning, you were talking about somebody and she said his name was Brian Like, Like.
Yes, Brian Like was the chaplain.
Yeah.
Mike and George probably would remember him. He was, Paul Kaler was the chaplain, but Paul Kaler was more of a politician, and Brian did the real counseling and I think probably even the religious services. I arrived, changes at Dickinson, many of them had occurred in the decade before me during the Rubendahl era. When I was just talking to some people the other day, and they remembered when students were required to go to chapel.
Yeah.
And some of you might remember stories about the women at Dickinson were required to be in their dorm at a certain time in the evening, and men could not visit after certain hours. Mary still remembers. And Dieter Rolfink, whom I see regularly, Dieter Rolfink, German for those who don't remember, said that when they had children, they used to get women students to be babysitters for their children. And if they were going to be out after hours, they had to call the house mother and get permission.
Wow.
for the student to arrive late.
Isn't that something? Well, we're a small enough group, so if you'd like to ask a question or share something, just go ahead and unmute yourself. If we start talking over each other, I'll just call on one or the other, but we're small enough, I think we can do it. Who has questions?
I'll ask a question to Noel, and that is, we got a 50th reunion coming up. Are you going to join us?
I would. When reunions come up, the only thing that I can go to regularly would be the kind of reception I saw you at a couple of years ago. But somebody decides to invite old faculty to the dinner for the reunion. And I have been to some. In fact, I remember one I went to some years ago. People arrived at the table. I knew some, I didn't know others. And somebody arrived and said, I was just over at the mailroom. And I remembered my combination, and I went and I could still open the mailbox. And of course, how are they going to change it? It'd be major work to change the combination. You just assume that the previous occupant went away and stayed away, but this person had gone. So George, I would come to the general reception, but if you want to see me at some other event, I have had years when I go and I don't see certain people because they retreat to their fraternity and rarely come out of the place. Does that help enough?
Sure. Yeah, we'll work something out.
Let me know. I'm usually around. Once in a while we're on Cape Cod, but if I know far enough ahead, I can probably arrange.
Saturday,
Very-
June 12th.
So my question, Bruce, are you still teaching?
All right, so Noel, when you came to Denver for GSA, I gave you and Helen and Noel Jr. a brief tour of the Geology Museum at the Colorado School of Mines, where I was the director.
Uh-huh.
And so technically I was,
Barb.
yeah, I was teaching, but I didn't have a classroom position. Hey, there's Barb. And that was a lot of fun. I did that for 10 years. And then I went back to consulting. So right now I'm consulting, and then before that I was teaching for 7 years in the state college system here in Denver. But yeah, teaching's important stuff, as you know, and probably another handful of folks have taught too, I'm guessing, over the years.
So we had a new person join us, Barb. We have done lots of Falderall already, but Barb Faulkner is from what class?
1974.
74. So you are in the ballpark of some of the other people. Did you know Mary?
Mary Rose?
No.
Let
Well,
me-
Mary Rose was supposed to come for this, but she begged off. She's going to see it in a recording. Mary
Okay.
Somerville is online.
I was a year ahead of you, Barb.
Hi, good to see you. Wonderful.
Where?
And I know Bruce, I know George Lee. This is great.
And
Hi,
Barbara,
hi everyone. I'm
I
sorry.
can send you a recording of, Noel just gave a whole little rundown of things. So I'll make sure you get a copy of the recording so you can watch his opening.
Super. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Who else?
Eric?
Or no?
What's Eric doing? Uh-oh.
Wait, unmute yourself. There. Oh. I don't know.
Eric, you're still muted.
There he goes.
There we go.
Good.
Yeah, I live a little bit north of Pittsburgh. I work as a security guard and left Ithaca to work for the Boy Scouts for 4 years, and then worked as a counselor in a juvenile delinquent home. And then I've been the last 14 years as a security guard, various places. And been back. I usually go back to Ithaca. Of course, Dad passed away Memorial Day of 2017. But the Museum of the Earth up in Ithaca published his local geology book. So I was excited to hear that you had done one locally too. And I put together a little brochure at the Boy Scout camp about geology at the camp and Cayuga Lake. So I have that available for the people that use the camp. And mom, we left our house and mom moved into a Kendall community in Ithaca. So she's doing well. She's turning 91 the 4th of July. So, and my brothers are in Washington and Hawaii. So I also I got into New Zealand on a group study exchange through Rotary back in 1988. So I'd love to go back to New Zealand.
I've always said you can hardly go wrong there.
Yeah.
Dave or Mike?
I'm still teaching. This semester, I'm teaching a course in the geography of New Jersey, and that's at 1:40 today, and a climate change class. So that's Still, but no big class. In the middle of the pandemic beginning last spring, I had 290 students in an intro physical geography class. Half climate, half geology. So it's a great opportunity to get back to my geology roots when I'm doing mostly climate research, climate studies.
So do you get heckled by climate deniers?
I've gotten some hate mail, no death threats, but I've gotten hate mail. Yeah. Oh, I have colleagues who have gotten death threats around the country. Yeah. So yeah, but mostly, New Jersey's a highly educated state. So most people understand what's going on. And you're often preaching to the choir, let's face it, people that come to your presentations. But yeah, and I've had students come and talk and either ask questions that they have or questions that their uncle at Thanksgiving dinner is going to have about the situation. So yeah, I didn't know I have to become a political scientist as well as a scientist, as the state climatologist, and just I do polar work still. No, I still keep I guess the global database on snow extent. That's kind of the go-to for all.
This is for the Arctic, right?
Yeah, it's the northern hemisphere. So I can tell you where the snow's sitting on the ground right now and shouldn't be sitting on the ground. Go to snowcover.org, and that's where we keep the records. So it's great to wear. That's the great thing about academics. Noel, you wear multiple hats. You teach the state climatologist position. My goodness, I'm involved in so many things, and I still do the polar work.
So a short story. A few years ago, I was having trouble with my back and sciatica, and I had an MRI, and they diagnosed what they call severe spinal stenosis, which means essentially the vertebrae are fused together down near the lower end. And so I was sent to a neurosurgeon in Harrisburg to talk about this. And the guy looked at the MRI and told me what he could do. It's a major operation, and answered my questions. And I thought, this is sounding pretty good. And I thought we were almost done. And he looked at me and sort of leaned forward and said, "Are you a climate conspiracist?" And it just floored me. It's such a different world from the medicine. And I hesitated for a fair bit, and then I dumped on him full bore with what's happening to glaciers, which is my main strength. And he clearly wasn't going to give in. And fortunately, Helen and I had said, we're going to get more than one opinion. So we went to Johns Hopkins, and it was very different there. And as you can imagine, most people must know that Hopkins is pretty high end as a medical place. And I ended up having the operation there. It was successful, but I ain't what I used to be. And Mike, what are you doing besides going between Utah and New Jersey?
Well, we spent a lot of time in Utah last year. We went out in February with the intention of coming back in April, which is what we normally would do. And then COVID hit and we just stayed. We didn't come back until October. So we didn't do much back and forth. We have in my town, which is crazy for a town of 15,000 people, we have an Actors Equity Theater. And I was chairman of the board up until this January when I had to back down, although I'm still on the board. And I've spent a lot of time running that theater. And we are currently doing stuff to our house. We have a late 1800s house, and I've been doing a lot of the restoration that I wanted to do for years and finally got around to it. And that's pretty much consuming my time.
What town are you in, Mike?
Hamilton.
So Barb, we haven't heard from you very much. Have you retired yet?
Yes, that's my big news. I
Oh.
retired in November. And then and I'm living in Houston, Texas, which
Oh.
is where I've lived for the past 30 years
I
with
thought you were going back to Lancaster.
So, and I'll bring you up to date on Lancaster in just a minute, but during this 30-year span of time based in Houston, I was an expat in Moscow, Russia in 2012 to 2014. US and the EU applied sanctions. My project got shut down and I was sent back to Houston. So I retired and I worked as a geologist for 38 years. I retired in November. I am still living in Houston, Texas, but I also inherited the house I grew up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And now that I'm doubly vaccinated with a COVID vaccine, I plan to spend a lot more time in Lancaster. And I too have home repairs and some restoration to do on that house in Lancaster. My brother lives in Lancaster County and his family. So I started a Dickinson trend. I was the first person in my extended family ever to go to Dickinson. My younger brother followed in my footsteps. He and his wife have 2 daughters. The older one graduated last spring and the younger one is finishing her sophomore year at Dickinson. Neither one of those young women decided to major in earth science, though. They chose other things. So I'll be back in South Central Pennsylvania, probably in late May or early summer. I'll be back and forth. And after I retired, I looked around and thought, okay, it was still, before I got the vaccine, and I looked around and thought, I'm not going to be traveling in the immediate future. And Dickinson's offering this really interesting course online for undergrads, but also open to alums. So I signed up and I'm currently auditing the Arctic Studies class. And this morning, I'm late.
With Ben.
With Ben Edwards, and it's great. I love it. So this morning, my class ended, half an hour ago, and that's one reason why I was late to join all of you. So the Arctic Studies class focuses on the natural history of the Arctic, and then the second half of the semester is more on the geopolitics, climate modeling. My work group and I gave a presentation this morning about one of the inputs to one of the climate models for the 21st century. So it's all really, really interesting, and I'm enjoying it.
So when you're going to be up Lancaster way, if you sent me an email and got in touch, I'd love to see you for lunch or something like that.
That's a deal. I'll drive over and we'll have a great time catching up face to face. Fantastic.
Who's that? That puppy dog.
Bruce is showing off his puppy.
I could do his cats, but they heard with more difficulty.
That's our new dog.
The Dickinson connections, Barb, I remember you some, but Rick, I remember. But how many of us had siblings or children go to Dickinson? I know Bruce, ours were almost together.
Right, and my brother too.
Yeah, sure. But a lot of connections. Yeah, my son graduated.
Some of you may remember Randy Wallet. He had 2 Dickinson kids go.
Yeah, one was roughly my daughter's year.
Right.
You asked what I did. The one thing I forgot to mention, and I don't know how I could have forgotten it, was I did join Ben on the hiking and culinary adventure to southern Italian volcanoes,
Oh, good.
which was one of the most wonderful experiences. It was just, when I looked at the ad, I said, food, wine, and hiking. This has my name written all over. And I signed up for it, and we had a ball. It was just, I cannot recommend it enough.
I'm so jealous because we were supposed to go on a volcano tour of southern Italy last summer, postponed.
Right.
This summer, canceled. But next year, the group we went to the Alps with 3 years ago, we're doing Great Britain geology next summer. So, but no volcanoes. They decided to forego that.
Well, and this year, Etna was even erupting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ellen and I are not quite ready to go on trips or cruises yet. We're getting a little more interested, and one we've talked about perhaps doing is there are cruises about a week long that do the Columbia River.
Ooh.
Columbia and Snake River. And I spent a summer in Goldendale, Washington, working with a guy as a field assistant when he was doing his doctorate. I was an undergraduate. But, and some of you might remember in 74, Chuck Jarvis and I did Lewis and Clark expedition in the summer. And even though I have been there, I think this cruise down the river would be quite nice, or up the river. They go both ways, but we haven't signed on yet. Before the virus hit, we were on a wait list for one that would start in the Norwegian fjords and then go down to the Orkneys and eventually to Scotland. And this is an area that's always appealed to us. My wife is into knitting and weaving, and they do lots of that there, lots of sheep and so on.
No, you mentioned Mount Washington, and it reminded me that I think in 1979 or 78, I did a hike with some friends. We did what they called it a half presidential traverse of the presidential mountain range, and we ended up at Mount Washington in the winter. It was insane, but it was a winter where there was no snow in New England, the town where we started from, which made all their living from winter sports. They were having to manufacture snow so people could go cross-country skiing, and it was terrible. So we lucked out in that regard, but it was still quite arduous. And we spent the night in this crazy little stone hut that they built on the way up, and it was probably the most adventurous thing I did, one of the most in my life. And I think the only time I ever wore crampons and really needed them. It was amazing. It was just incredible. And I credit you for my interest in doing stuff like that.
You don't want to be caught in a major storm up there, though.
Oh no, they have.
Mount Washington has the record for the highest wind, or did until recently.
Ever recorded. Yeah, there was a sign on this part of the trail, and it basically said, no matter how lovely the weather is, do not go past this sign if you only have shorts and a t-shirt and you're not prepared for severe weather, because you will die. Basically, the weather comes up quickly, and you'll never make it. So we were quite prepared.
So Dave, I occasionally tune in on weather sites to see something from CocoRa's, and I have frequently noticed that New Jersey has one of the highest densities of volunteers of almost anywhere but out where it started. I gather you had something to do with this.
Yeah.
Tell these people what CocoRa's is.
It's the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. I didn't make that up. That's out of Colorado State, out of Fort Collins in the state climate office after a flash flood there in 97 killed a number of people. It's citizen science at its best. There's 20,000 citizen scientists around the country. And I've been very close friends with the former now state climatologist out there and the current coordinator for the program. And we started it up in Jersey. We just got a new person last night because the newspaper did an article on it. We have about 300 active volunteers who every morning go out and measure precipitation. I think 134 last year missed fewer than 7 days during the course of the year. And it's just wonderful citizen science, all generations, all ages, and it's incredibly useful for a variety of reasons, including the measurement of snow. It's the best you can get out there. So yeah, it's really neat. You know, Mike, it's down near your country. The Sandpaper on Long Beach Island published something last week, and we got a Brant Beach observer yesterday sign on. So no, it's a wonderful program. I mean, there's wonderful citizen science programs, birding, and there's one to listen to frogs. You adopt a marsh and listen to frogs. It's just so many opportunities like Barb's taking advantage of now with the classwork.
So Bruce, how's your brother?
Dickinson taught us that.
Yeah, so no, my brother's living in Avondale over near Kennett Square, and he's still doing medicine. He was working with AstraZeneca for a number of years, and then he became independent, and he's still consulting and loving it and doing rocks and stuff for various small mineral clubs and this sort of thing. I know.
How about playing the ukulele?
Oh yeah, every time I get together with him, we're playing music. But my mom passed in November of 19, and so I was back there for 3 weeks with him there, and my littlest brother, who's the tallest of the three, he does agronomy, and he just retired from teaching in Philly for 40 years at Saul High School. But anyway, yeah, we're still making music when we get together. I was going to tell you a story that reminded me of one of the projects you sent up from Antarctica, and that was one of the times you were traveling. You sent some slides to Priscilla Laws. Anyone remember Dr. Laws from physics? Sure, she was so sweet. Yeah, and
They're
Ken,
still around.
yeah, and so you sent these slides up, and I was taking her optics class, and you said you needed to know what this optical phenomenon was. You took a picture from an airplane window or something, and Dr. Laws showed me the slides, and she said, yeah, you want to do this for extra credit? And I said, sure, I don't know the first thing about it. And I had to go looking through all these different optics books, and it had a special name. It was a very special type of halo formed by ice crystals at a certain altitude, at a certain temperature and pressure and everything. And I learned a lot. It was something that I never thought I'd be looking at. And there you were sending up these pictures from the other end of the earth.
Is Ken Laws still around too, Noel?
They're both around. Ken is struggling. He needs to have his food minced in order to eat it because he's some throat problem. And I think Priscilla is having a hard time with her memory, but they're still around. There is a group called the Retired Professionals of Dickinson College, RPDC, and some of us, well, before the coronavirus, we would get together for luncheon mid each semester. We would have a holiday party off campus with potluck that was marvelous. And all that, and there were groups like Truman Bullard would have a music group once a month. There was a poetry group, a film group, and then one just plain hot topics, whatever is going on. And these all met, and then the coronavirus made a mess of it. And soon after, the hot topics group started getting together with Zoom. And we have a regular weekly thing Every other week, there's a talk. For example, tomorrow, Jim Heffler from Poli-Sci, one of his specialties is the right to die as an issue, and he's going to talk about that. Sometimes they're political, and then in the in-between weeks, it's just a bunch of us get together and chat. And what brought me there is Priscilla often comes on, and she has some very good questions on occasion. She's there mostly for the talks, but she's still there. The major one that I see, it's the actual organizer at the moment, is Dieter Rolfink. I'm trying to think of others I see regularly, but it's hard because the group also includes retired law school faculty. There's one who's a regular, and townies or spouses. And so there are townies who have more than a bit of education and who could easily be academics, and they show up at it. And that's been one of my better, I have not seen a single colleague in my department since a year ago last March. And it's annoying because I used to go in most mornings on weekdays and enjoy chats with people. And I have corresponded with a number of the department folks, email, occasionally Zoom. I know that Marcus Key has grown a beard, for example. He was the clean cut boy for a while, but that's about it. I don't know, Laura, do we have a time constraint?
Probably wrap up in the next 5-10 minutes.
Okay, whatever. Who wants to join in?
No, I have one question, comment to make. I spent 40 years at Dickinson, and I've written a memoir, and it's been accepted and entered into the Dickinson archives. If anybody's interested in reading it, covers the period from 1960 to the year 2000. I was there for exactly 20 years or 40 years.
Is it online?
And so I've written all about my experiences about the physics department mostly, and some interaction with other departments. What's that?
Is it online?
Yes, it is. If you go to the Dickinson archives, it'll be in there under memoirs.
Oh, good. So before most of you tuned in, John was on and we were marking time, and I reminded him that the day that I arrived at Dickinson and was moving into my office, some of you remember that janitor's closet in the basement of Health House. I was moving in, and at mid-morning, John arrived, and for years, he and I and Al Grinnell and maybe a few others used to have coffee together in the chemistry stockroom, full of odors of various chemicals. And the day John arrived, he came and he said, "Oh." And some of you may remember that in those days, they were reconstructing East College, and they had gutted the inside. And John came over and said, the one whole end of East College fell in, and all of the stone had just tumbled in to the middle of the hole where they were going to rebuild the building. And it's probably just as well they discovered that before they put the insides back. I always thought, is this a sign of what it's going to be like at Dickinson? But it turns out everything was fine. But
at the time, it buried a backhoe. And what triggered the whole thing was some guy was down in a ditch next to the building with a backhoe, cleaning out down to the foundation so they could rebuild that first. When he noticed the little stones coming down on the roof of his back, And he looked up and he bailed out pretty quickly. And just as he got out of there, the wall collapsed right on top of the backhoe. So we
the
were lucky
tractor
that-
got covered up
Yes, he would have been. Yep.
and they reused the stone.
Yes, they
took the
carted it
motor
away
off.
and they recut it and reused it.
Yep.
I think the whole time that I was at Dickinson East was just a 4 walls held up by braces from the center out. And I didn't see it all put back together until I came back for my 40th reunion and was just amazed at how beautiful it turned out.
So have you guys gone to reunions? Do you find them a good adventure?
We do.
I do.
I went,
I love it.
It's a chance to connect with people that you haven't seen, don't see regularly, and sort of catch up. And so, yes.
And the Glee Club got together. That's how you and I run into each other. You would come back for your Glee Club reunions.
Right. Well, and I would have come back for my 50th last year, except that didn't happen.
Well,
yeah,
join me this year.
It's going to be virtual too, isn't it, George?
Excuse me?
It's going to be virtual, isn't it?
No, we're there. I just got the notice today to sign up. We're gonna have both. But
Because the 50th is a small enough group, we're able to welcome them back this year for that weekend. Yep. And Michael, we're working on yours for the fall. To have your makeup with you in the fall.
That's good to know. My next question was going to be, are we going to do anything for the class of 70?
Yes, hold October 15th and 16th.
Oh, you're kidding.
No, you already know you're busy.
That's the Geologic Association of New Jersey's annual meeting, and I'm the president. Oh, no. Oh, I'm going to have to think about that, how to do that.
Noel, do you remember a student named David Gaylord? I think he was in my class and he transferred to the University of South Dakota.
You remember him?
I remember.
He and I journeyed across country together.
what's the last name?
Gaylord, David
Gaylord.
Gaylord.
Oh, Dave Gaylord. Yeah, I
Football.
remember.
He and I were friends. I think I met him through your class, I think, and then he decided to become, he decided he wanted to have more geology.
Well, he transferred.
South Dakota. Yeah, and he transferred to South Dakota. So we corresponded, we had letters, back and forth for a while, and he described his mustache freezing.
We ended up, one of my first years at Dickinson, Geological Society of America was in Atlantic City. And we went, and I saw my old friend Bob Rutford there. And he, at the time, was some administrator at South Dakota. And he had his friend, whose name is slipping right at the moment, who was the head of the South Dakota survey. And he said, we have jobs, summer jobs. And they ended up for a number of years having students come out there and work for the South Dakota survey in the summer. And I lost track of Dave Gaylord, but I have seen him off and on recently. He was working on geology somewhere in either Washington or Oregon and doing good geology.
No, did Liz Gordon go out to South Dakota one summer?
I don't remember for sure.
You remember, Dave?
I know Harry Whitney went out there and had a terrible accident. I think on a motorcycle, but you know about Harry, Barb?
No, but I would very much like to get an update on him. does anyone here know anything about how he's doing now? He
I
was in
don't
my
know.
class.
I don't know. I lost track.
Me too.
You know,
Hey,
the
Noel,
tough part with the reunions is that you only see your class. And like, I can see Bruce, but the year ahead of us, I had more friends come out of that year than other years in geology, and you don't get to see them with the reunions, but I don't know how you'd ever have floating reunions like that.
We've tried a couple of times, Dave, actually, and I think it was late 70s one year that, say it was, the class of 75, and they purposely invited 74 and 76. We've tried that a couple of times at the urging of classes, and have had very few people on those shoulder seasons. But, we call it Alumni Weekend, not Reunion Weekend, because you really can come any year. But we have tried, because so many people say that I have friends ahead and behind me, but a lot of our affinity reunions, whether it's a student group or Greek group or athletic team, when we have reunions, we get much bigger participation, because you do spend even more time with those folks than your classmates per se.
We've had several choir
Geology
reunions over
reunion.
the years. Yeah, Rich Kittle from the class of 70, he has organized choir reunions, and pulling alumni from many, many different years. And that's great. And it's a different, if they're subject or topic oriented, then anybody from any year at all.
Yeah, those are great.
Rich is one of the people behind the Glee Club reunions too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was in 4 years and never went to a reunion of the chapel choir and the choir and follies, but life gets busy.
Indeed. Well, I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. This has been just such a nice morning chatting with you all. Noel stays very active on email if you guys have follow-up questions or anything. Noel, you still use your Dickinson email address, correct?
Yes, it's simply Potter N. There was a student named Potter that got the one without the N. So it's pottern@dickinson.edu. And I'd love to hear more from any of you anytime.
Yes. So to Noel, thank you. To our participants, thank you for joining us. If you have other faculty or retired administrators you'd love to hear from, let me know. I'm Wills L at Dickinson, or just email alumni@dickinson.edu. And I'm always putting these things together. So
I thought of one, Laura.
Okay.
Possibly Chuck Jarvis.
Oh, sure.
And he's in Florida, but he shows up every so often at our retired people thing on Zoom. And Dave Cranes occasionally shows up.
Okay.
They're the ones from away that I hear. There are more people on campus or around too.
No, well, but that's the joy of doing this. We can have them come in from anywhere.
It was awful nice to see you guys.
Same
Good
here.
to see you.
Wonderful,
Lovely to see
Noel.
you too.
Thanks. Laura,
Good
thanks
to
for
see
putting
you,
it
Noel.
together.
Thanks.
This is
Laura.
great. Thank
Hi,
you.
everybody.
Everyone
George?
stay healthy.
Ciao.
Is your
Yeah.
contact information accurate on the Dickinson alumni thing?
Pretty close.
I'd like to get back in touch with you.
I would love to do the same. So Laura or somebody will get us in touch.
George and Michael, connect you. Okay.
Barb,
How's
say
that?
hi to Rick for me.
All right.
I will.
Greetings,
Excellent. I'll be talking to him later today.
Bruce, best to Wayne too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
He's on my freshman floor. Great people.
Take care, everyone.
All right, take care.
Take care,
Thank
everyone.
you, Laura, for putting
Bye-bye.
this
Bye-bye.
together.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You're
all.
welcome.
Be well.
Nice to meet
Thank
y'all.
you so much. Be well.
Sure.